2 hours ago, the trade war between Canada and the United States stopped being a standoff. Overnight, in 3 simultaneous by-elections across Toronto and Quebec, Canadian voters delivered Mark Carney a majority government. Not a plurality. Not a fragile coalition held together by backroom deals. A full majority. With transfers from allied MPs already in place, Carney's Liberals crossed 174 seats in the House of Commons, the threshold that changes everything. Because a minority prime minister threatening to reroute energy exports and impose critical mineral controls is making noise. A majority prime minister doing those exact same things is making policy. Washington had spent months banking on one theory. Carney's political opponents at home would constrain him. Domestic pressure would force compromise. That theory is now dead. Carney walked onto the stage in Ottawa just after midnight. Calm. No celebration list. A policy agenda. And the first thing he said told you everything about where this goes. He did not mention Trump by name. He looked into the cameras and said the words now circulating in every diplomatic and financial channel on Earth. It is time to be serious. We will build a Canadian economy that is less dependent on the United States. Not a campaign line. A governing mandate. Backed by a parliamentary majority that cannot be dissolved by internal political pressure. But before we get into what this majority actually unlocks, hit subscribe and like this video right now. We cover this arc in real time, and you will not want to miss what comes next. Here is what Washington is now staring at. For months, the calculation inside the Trump administration was simple. A minority prime minister is a weak prime minister. His most aggressive positions were bounded by parliamentary arithmetic, by opposition pressure, by business lobbying from within. That ceiling is gone. The distinction between a minority and majority government is not subtle. It is structural. Every senior trade official in Washington who understood Canadian politics knew this was the moment they could not afford. It happened anyway. Let us be precise about what a majority now gives Carney the uncontested authority to do. First, he can immediately accelerate the rerouting of Canadian energy exports to Pacific and Atlantic markets without requiring a single opposition vote. Over the past 14 months, pipeline capacity, port infrastructure, and buyer contracts with Japan, South Korea, Germany, and the United Kingdom were quietly advanced. Japan's $8.2 billion infrastructure commitment, South Korea's joint LNG financing, Germany's guaranteed purchase framework. All of it is now executable without Carney looking over his shoulder at a confidence vote. Those were options. With a majority at his back, they become decisions. Second, and this is where it gets serious, Carney now has the political runway to implement critical mineral export controls at a scale that would have been impossible under a minority government. Canada supplies approximately 37% of the uranium powering American nuclear reactors. The cobalt in American EV batteries and defense production lines runs through Canadian mines. The Pentagon's strategic reserve for several of these materials sits at roughly 12 weeks of capacity. A majority government imposing individual federal approval on every shipment of uranium, cobalt, nickel, and potash to the United States is not a trade measure. It is a structural lever on American defense industrial output. Carney now has the authority to pull it without internal political consequence. Third, every federal procurement contract currently held by an American company operating in Canada is under active review by a government that no longer needs to compromise on the outcome. The estimated annual value of those contracts exceeds $24 billion. A minority Carney could signal reviews were underway. A majority Carney can terminate contracts and redirect procurement to Canadian and allied suppliers without a single opposition motion forcing a delay. American energy firms and defense contractors with Canadian asset positions, ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, Chevron, are now operating under a government with both the will and the parliamentary authority to restructure those terms unilaterally. What happened inside Washington's trade apparatus after the results came in was not coordinated panic. It was something more revealing, a quiet, immediate reassessment. Officials who had publicly maintained that Canada's posture was negotiating theater were privately walking that back within hours. One government insider described the internal atmosphere simply, "We assumed the arithmetic would catch up with him. It didn't." That sentence captures everything wrong with Washington's working theory on Carney. They modeled him as a politician constrained by politics. He was never that. He is a former central banker who ran the Bank of Canada through the 2008 financial crisis and the Bank of England through Brexit. He thinks in structural dependencies and decade-long leverage positions. He was not governing toward an election. He was governing through one. And here is the detail that has not broken through the noise yet but matters enormously. Carney did not win this majority by moving toward the center on trade. He won it by arguing that Canada's confrontation with Washington was not a policy choice, but an existential necessity. Those voters in Toronto and Quebec did not vote against Trump. They voted for a Canada that no longer treats American goodwill as a structural assumption. That is a mandate with a specific economic philosophy behind it. It tells Carney he has permission, political, democratic, and moral permission, to pursue economic decoupling not as a last resort, but as a first principle. If you find this breakdown valuable, subscribe and drop a like. The next moves in this arc are going to come fast, and you will want the context when they do. The American business community registered this immediately. Executives who had been lobbying quietly for a de-escalation window understood what a Carney majority means. That window is closing. The American Petroleum Institute, which has consistently warned that U.S. Gulf Coast refineries cannot switch from heavy Canadian crude without 18 to 24 months and billions in retrofitting, is now modeling scenarios where that transition is not theoretical, but imminent. Marathon Petroleum, Valero, and Phillips 66, the three refiners most exposed to Canadian crude dependency, moved on the overnight vote results before a single policy announcement was made. Because the market understood what a majority means before Ottawa said a word. Internationally, the signal landed fast. The European Union affirmed continued engagement on the Energy Corridor framework. The United Kingdom confirmed cooperative discussions remain on track. Japan and South Korea, both in active negotiation over long-term Canadian crude contracts, signaled their investment timelines are unchanged. The common thread in every international response was the same word: stability. What allies and energy buyers heard in the vote results was that Carney's position is now durable. They are not negotiating with a government that could fall before contracts clear. They are negotiating with a majority government with a full electoral term behind it. That changes the risk calculus on every agreement currently in progress. So what does Washington do now? Trump has three paths, and none of them lead anywhere good. He can maintain existing pressure measures and watch Carney use his majority to execute the full decoupling agenda previously held in reserve. Canadian energy, minerals, and procurement shift away from American markets at a pace that triggers real supply chain disruption in the Midwest swing states that matter most politically. Or he can pursue a genuine negotiated reset. But that requires acknowledging that Canada now negotiates from democratic strength, not vulnerability. Carney has been explicit. No talks begin under threat. A negotiated path requires Trump to publicly step back from measures he framed as strength. His administration has consistently refused that cost. Or he can escalate further and watch Carney absorb each move with majority backing, respond with instruments already built, and continue pulling allies further from Washington's orbit. Every escalation now gives Carney a democratic justification for the next countermove. The majority is not just legislative power, it is political armor. 2 hours ago, 3 by-election results in Toronto and Quebec closed the chapter on the trade war Washington thought it understood. Carney did not celebrate last night. He announced, "The economy will be made less dependent on the United States. Not a threat. A governing platform backed by 174 seats and a Democratic mandate that Washington cannot argue with, negotiate around, or pressure away." Trump wanted a weakened prime minister constrained by his own parliament. He got a strengthened one with nothing left to constrain him. The trade war just entered its most dangerous phase. And for the first time since it began, only one side of this confrontation has a clear mandate for what comes next.